this, providing everyone all right with that? Recording? Yep, good. Okay, fantastic. So just to bring you back into the picture, a little reminder here. This, as I'm not sure how recently you would have heard or reheard the conversation that Dan and I had, but this is Kim Scott's model, American spelling there for candor. But basically, this whole model is predicated on the idea of we need to speak up more with people. And, maybe a little bit like, Emily was suggesting there with the people that she's working with at the moment, that, having saying what she needs to say a little bit more and turning the spotlight back onto some other people a bit more as well. And so this is really a model. This is something that, all of us to varying degrees struggle with in the workplace and in our personal interactions as well. And so this is a framework for recognizing what the important elements of speaking up are, giving people feedback, and saying what we need to say when we need to say it in a manner which is palatable to the people that we're having those conversations with, so that we can move forward from situations where um, we're not saying what we need to say, people are kept in the dark, people act in ways that aren't necessarily particularly healthy in their personal interactions. And so when Kim Scott developed this, the whole idea is she suggests that we need to try and find more of this, more radical candor. And she's slightly concerned with the language that she's used with this. I read a post from her this morning where she talks about it. She said a few different things, one of which is the reason she called it radical candor is not so much that it's a radical act, but more that it's radical in that, it doesn't happen all that often. It's a radical thing when it does happen, that people actually speak their truth in a way that's enormously respectful of the people they're speaking it with. But today she was saying in this post that she wrote was that she kind of regrets not calling it radical compassion, because she was talking about Netflix, who apparently have just sacked three very senior people, and apparently Netflix have taken on the radical candor sort of framework and approach. And in her view, what she was suggesting was that maybe they've got a mixed up view of it, because basically she talked about, that they talked about the fact that they were having brutally honest conversations with their execs and they wiped people out. And she said that, and we're all familiar with that phrase of brutal honesty, but her view is that brutal honesty actually fits in this quadrant here, down in obnoxious aggression. That there's absolutely, and Dan's talked about this before, that there's absolutely no need to be brutal about this. This is about having a high care factor, and brutal honesty, if we're going to go with that concept, doesn't really fit as a high care factor. If you're going to be brutal, it's much more likely to be sitting down here. And without all the information about what happens at Netflix, Kim Scott was quite quick to come out and say it sounds more like obnoxious aggression than it does like radical candor. So if we look at I'll just do a whistle stop tour through the four of them just to bring everyone back into the picture. So the radical candor area, so the whole thing is this idea of we've got to increase this care factor. So as you heard her talk about, I think Dan asked her a question in the interview and talked about this sort of base level, and she talks about common human decency and that everything should be above that basic line of common human decency. Once we start to fall below this horizontal axis here, then when we're not being the best we need to be with people, we're not giving people what they deserve, we're not being our best selves in relation to the conversations and the feedback that we're giving. So everything above this sort of baseline, this horizontal line here, is what we're trying to do is increase the care factor. So if Emily's working with these people on her team who she's previously done a bit of rescuing for, she's previously done the work for them, and now she's asking them to step up a bit. Obviously, in that realm, you need to, Emily, and I'm sure you're managing this beautifully. The idea of the relationships here are vitally important. Maintaining the relationships is vitally important. And one of the reasons we often don't go into this quadrant of radical candor is because we're worried about damaging relationships. You know, we're worried about the impact that this will have if I say what I need to say. I don't want to upset people. I don't want to irritate people. I don't want to lose people. Um, and so Kim Scott's view of this is that the more we practice care, the more we recognize the sensitivities of the people we're working with, the more important it is. Well, not the more important it is. It is essential that we consider the care factor very as a real a situation of prime importance in order for us to be able to challenge directly. And you know, she talks about it being an act of kindness to actually speak up. So this is not about brutal honesty or, you know, blasting people. So challenging directly is the thing that we often avoid doing. And we avoid doing it, as we discussed in the last session, for a couple of main reasons, which are we don't want to damage relationships and we don't like conflict as a general rule. So we don't tend to challenge people directly. And what is built once we've worked on the relationships and we start saying the things that we need to say to people, we give them the feedback that they actually need to get rather than pussyfooting around and ignoring that. We start to build trust. And as a result of that trust and, you know, through respectful confrontation, change and growth are allowed to occur. And, you know, that's what Emily was suggesting at the beginning there. Something does need to change in your situation. And the most likely way to get that sort of growth and change is to move into this quadrant. And as you'll see in a minute, the important thing about recognizing each of these quadrants is there's a big difference between here. I'm presuming you can see my little cursor there. There's a big difference between here and here, for example. You know, here the care factor is reasonably strong and the challenge is quite light. You know, I've noticed this, for example. Up here, we're talking about a much higher care factor and we're talking about a much stronger challenge factor that can occur as a result of that strong relationship for it to occur in a healthy way. So little nudges in this direction is what we're looking at this stage. And that might be a starting point for you, Emily, as you sort of embark on this slightly new journey with your people. As you possibly remember, I asked Kim a question in the interview and she said that about 90% of our conversations end up in this area here. And again, there's a difference between here and right out here. And, you know, in the education and health professions that we're collectively in, we are very high empathy people. And the last thing we want to do as high empathy people is upset people. And we pussyfoot around a little bit and we chicken out of the strong conversations we want to have for the same two reasons. We don't want to damage relationships. We're not big on conflict. And we end up not saying what we need to say. We end up picking up the pieces for other people. We end up doing work for other people. We end up being too kind. It's the empathy that we're showing is not helpful. It's actually ruinous. And obviously the further we go out in this direction, the more ruinous. You know, and she's got as the marker here silence. We just don't say anything. We just pick up the pieces for other people without them even realizing that we're doing it for them. And obviously the end point of this, they remain ignorant. There's no change or growth. There's no development. And the silence that we practice isn't helpful for anybody. It starts to, and I think Emily, what Emily described, sorry to keep using this example, Emily, but I think it works well. What Emily described at the beginning there was that her cup was full. She kept giving. She had a great class, you know, skating through what was happening at school to some extent and had time and energy to put in that effort for other people as well. And as you said, sort of rescuing them. Eventually that cup empties out and we need to stop doing that. And unless we're being really considerate about and very deliberate about the way we're doing that, it could end up here down in the realm of obnoxious aggression, because now we're getting the shits a little bit. You know, I'm a bit sick of doing this for you, and maybe calling that out publicly with people. So let's go down to obnoxious aggression at this stage. So this is really this, you know, right up at this level up here, it might just be an eye roll or, you know, some little snide comment to, you know, right down here into really ugly town down here where we're calling people out publicly in the staff room, in the corridors, sort of really awful behaviour, aggressive behaviour, really deliberately putting other people down publicly, and that sort of behaviour that, you know, as Dan and I have said before, perhaps we don't see too much in schools. Hopefully we don't see too much in schools. I'm not sure about the Corporation of Bowen Health for you, Jackie. Hopefully there's not too much about it. You know, you've talked about psychological safety and kindness there. So I'm guessing it's not too strong an element of what happens for you. But certainly, you know, as you know, some of you know, we do some work in the sports world, we do some work in the corporate world, and it seems to be that those environments are, you know, people call each other out can call each other out in a more aggressive and obnoxious way in those sort of environments. But yeah, certainly the snide comments and the eye rolls, they happen in every environment. And so we're likely to see some of that. And then finally down here in the manipulative insincerity. So this is really passive aggressive sort of behavior. It leads to mistrust because people know that you're talking about them. You know, Blake knows that he's, you know, Matt's talking to me about him because he's heard little snippets of it along the way. Yeah, look at him, damaged by it, upset. We should change our ways, Matt. So this is where you're having the conversation with someone else instead of with the person you need to be having it with. This is about you. This is about, you know, you're trying to come out of this smelling like roses. You know, Matt quietly comes to me as the principal or the deputy at the school or whatever, and he says, you know, bloody Blake, I noticed he was late again this morning. That sort of comment, that sort of behavior. So Matt doesn't want any mud to stick to him, but he wants me to know that Blake's not pulling his weight. And so it is manipulative and it is insincere because he's not, you know, saying it to the person he needs to be saying it to. And it's poor form. It's not good behavior, and it's damaging of relationships. And of course, as soon as Blake gets wind of it, you know, mistrust starts to grow. He's not going to share stuff with Matt anymore, etc. I would like to say, and you know, I'm not sure what people's thoughts are on this. I don't think this is at all uncommon in any organisation. Maybe the extreme levels of it are slightly less common, but you know, I've certainly worked in a lot of different environments where, you know, there's the backstabbing, there's the undermining, there's the white anting, you know, and I think we've all been in environments where that's reasonably common. So what I'm going to do at this stage is let's put you into two little chat groups just for 5 or 6 minutes to bring you guys, I've done all the talking at this stage, bring you guys back into the picture a little bit, talk to each other a little bit about it, and then come back and again for 5 or 6 minutes, we'll share back with the whole group before we move on to a new element of this topic for you today. So I'll just set up couple of groups here. I'll just stop this share. Go into the breakouts, 2 rooms. Sign manually. What I might do today is put Blake and Matt together actually, because they got some shit to sort out now. And mainly just because you guys are obviously working in the same context and it might be helpful to share a little bit across faculties. And then in the other room, Emily, I'm very aware of the fact that you're not in lockdown, and so some of the conversation might be slightly different. And Jackie, you're in it for the 5th time, so I'm not sure to what extent that will impact things. But obviously the context of what we're all exploring with COVID in our various ways is going to impact how candid we are with the people that we're working with and living with, because of the fact that certainly in the work situation, a lot of it is remote now. So I'll set these up for 6 minutes. If you can just keep an eye on the time yourselves and just think about sort of sharing 3 minutes either way, and we'll come back in 6. Alrighty. Pause record.
To our detriment. That it's to our detriment.
Zoom recording. So this is the concept called terror. Are any of you familiar with this acronym, terror? Have you come across this? No? Okay, so this is an acronym that stands for the T's for tribe, expectations, rank, and autonomy. And when, people behave, people are interesting, aren't they? Everyone's different and people behave in interesting and challenging ways. And often we don't know what the motivations are for their behavior. What we see is the outward element of their behaviors, and our own behaviors, for that matter. And we don't necessarily know what drives or motivates those behaviors. So Tara is kind of a bit of a look into some of the psychology of thinking about why is it that people are the way they are, and is there something that we can do to support them to behave in a way that's going to be more conducive to a positive environment. So when we think about radical candor, there's some people, and maybe we get the impression with some of the people you were talking about there, Matt, good people, capable, working hard. Really, there's no conversation needs to be had with them. But there's other people who fall outside of that. We all work with them, and there's reasons why people behave in the way that they do. And we often spend more time thinking about the symptoms rather than the causes. And perhaps I think this framework kind of helps us a little bit with consideration of some of the causes. So you might want to take some notes here. I'll leave it with you. But tribe is the first one. And the question really here is, am I part of the tribe? And this idea of the people, and you might start to think about people now as I talk about this over the next 5 or 10 minutes, and just think about, people who might fall one side or the other of this. So who might feel like they're really part of the tribe, who might feel like they're slightly out of the tribe. And I'll just explain why people might feel like they're on the inside or the outside. So with the tribe, we're really engaging here with this element. We're really engaging here that part of our brain that we've all heard various people talk about at different stages, which is the amygdala. And this is sort of our, the fight or flight or freeze response in our brain, which is really saying, am I safe here? Am I safe in this environment? Are people here? When I walk into this space, are people here with me or are they against me? And this is an unconscious question that people are asking as a general rule. The only conscious element of it, I suppose, is that people don't feel that they're welcome. They don't feel that they're part of the team. And we can look at that. We can be as inclusive as we want to be. We can be the greatest people, the greatest leaders, as inclusive as we want to be. And yet we've got no control over whether somebody feels that they are part of the team or not. And it will happen again, and this can be quite nuanced. It's not as simple as saying, I feel like I'm in the team or I feel like I'm not in the team. There'll be people who don't feel like they're fully in the team, and even just a slight misalignment with that can have a really negative impact on how they are within the group. And so I suppose, maybe thinking about your own team. Who's somebody for you who you might think, and maybe just chuck down some initials here, who's someone who feels like they are fully part of this place? And who is someone who might feel like, you get some semblance of the fact that maybe they just feel like they're a little bit on the outer, either in practice because they're not the person who gets invited out to drinks, or because they're the sort of person who does get invited, but for whatever reasons of their own psychological makeup, they go, oh yeah, they invited me, but I'm sure they don't really want me there. That sort of sense. Who's in the tribe? Who's out of the tribe in their own personal view of that? I suppose what they're really asking themselves, they sort of go into this survival mode and they're saying, is it dangerous for me here? Am I entitled to come in? I might have told you, Matt and Blake, this story before. I worked with someone years ago in a public school in New South Wales, and she used to sit out the front of the school and cry in her car before she came into school in the morning. It was a very small school, very small staff, a really cohesive and friendly staff. And, there was no one who was actively making her feel like she was on the outer, but boy, did she feel like she was on the outer. And, that's an extreme example of what it might look like to feel like, people aren't safe. It is dangerous for them. They are not part of the tribe. But in those situations, all the sort of nuance that goes with being part of the tribe goes out the door. That's the person who second guesses the invitation to drinks on a Friday afternoon. They've invited me, but they don't really want me there. That sort of sense. And, it's as I said, it's an unconscious thing. And that sort of deep, ancient brain of ours gets flooded with chemicals that are sort of saying, I've got to fight, I've got to fly, or I've got to freeze. And all of those are, problematic, I suppose, and happen for the people who don't feel like they're welcome. They don't feel like they're part of the joint. The second element of this acronym is expectation. And when it comes to expectation, this is about, do I know what's going on? Do I know what's going to happen next? When you get that email from your principal or whoever it is that's in the next level above you at work saying, I need to speak to you after school this afternoon. For some people who feel that they are very much part of the tribe, they feel safe in their environment, and they understand the basis of general expectations, they go, okay, yeah, I wonder what this could be about. And they're curious about it, they're interested, but they're not overly stressed about it. For other people, they start, and this is probably for the majority of us in some ways, the stress hormones start to be released, going, oh God, what have I done wrong? What's happened? And that you may be speaking to other staff members going, oh God, the boss has called me in. Do you know what's going on? I don't know what's happening. Have I done something wrong? Et cetera, et cetera. And when people are in that sense of feeling uncertain about their expectations, of what's expected of them, we don't like uncertainty. Uncertainty really confuses us. It makes us anxious. It makes us unsure of ourselves, and is problematic. And so, in a really healthy environment, what we try and do is reduce that level of uncertainty by helping people be really clear on what the expectations are and staying consistent with those expectations, and not throwing surprises at people, in a sense of that becoming the norm for the environment, that people are not comfortable, not at ease with what's going to happen next for them. And again, you might like to think of some people here in your work environment who, if we go back to the example that I used, you get called in by the boss or whatever, whoever that person is at that next level. Some of your people go, oh, Dan wants to see me. I wonder what that's about. Or, oh my God, what's Dan? Why does Dan want to see me? What's going on? What have I done wrong, etc. And once we start to go into this nuance of people who does feel like part of the tribe, who feels maybe slightly on the outer of the tribe, who does feel confident with expectations and confident with the work that they're doing, knowing that any surprises that are surprising for them would be surprising for anybody, rather than them feeling uncertain about everything that could happen next. The next element of the acronym here, the framework, is this concept of rank. And rank, this is very relevant in the school environment, because we work in such hierarchies in schools. And I'm not sure how it works for you, Jackie, but I'm sure there's quite clear hierarchies in your environment as well. And in relation to rank, people are trying to work out who's got the power here, who's more important. Am I less important than this person? How do I have to behave in this situation? Are they pulling rank on me? Is there a sense of sort of power that's at play here? And am I the victim of that power? What's the negative impact of this? So these are people, that you've worked with who go, well, you're the boss, you get to make all the decisions. So just tell me and I'll go and do it. There's that real sense that rank is something that people then use passively aggressively against people in leadership positions, or people in the leadership positions might use in a way to be patronizing, to talk down, to make people who are in a less important ranked position than they are feel ill at ease and uncomfortable. And again, it's a really nuanced thing. It's people could feel that about you as the leader without you having any desire for them to feel that way at all. And that happens, when you're elevated from within the ranks, as we were discussing earlier. The idea that, oh, you're the boss now, are you? And those sort of snide comments that come with that used to be one of the boys using your language there, Matt. And when people suddenly feel that, or not even suddenly, when people feel that they're in a lower ranked position, it can have impacts on their behavior. And finally, this concept of autonomy. And this is where we're trying to work out, do I get a say in things here or don't I? Do I get to disagree? If Matt says that the reports are due on Tuesday, the 27th, is that up for discussion? Can I ask about that? If Matt says this is the way we're programming, sorry, Matt, I'll just use you here. I know you're strong. With 3 kids, you're a tough guy. But with if Matt says this is the way we do reports, is there any opportunity for discussion here? This is the way we teach geometry with the year 8 kids. Is there any opportunity for discussion here? Can one of the new teachers say, well, actually, you know what, I've been exploring this way and I'd really like to try this? And comes back to Jackie's idea of sort of psychological safety. Do people feel comfortably in a position to be able to raise new ideas? Do people feel comfortably in the position to be able to make suggestions, disagree with something? You know, are we giving people a say or aren't we? And when people feel in that sort of victimized situation, either because it's deliberately set out by a leader that you don't get a say, and that's the very clear, underlying message that you don't get a say, that becomes obvious. But then even when that's not the intended message from you as a leader, there'll be people in your teams who feel that they don't get a say. We've all heard people say, oh, yeah, look, we had the meeting and he made it look like it was a democratic decision. We were all going to have a say, but we all know he just chose what he was going to do in the first place anyway. So it was a waste of time. People don't feel like they have that choice. They don't have that say. So how are we doing for time? We're short on time. But what I want to do is, having just sort of shared that basic framework with you, what I'd like to do is just give you 5 minutes, again with the same partner, just have a bit of a chat about how that's landed with you. And then we'll come back and just run around the room very quickly then, and see if there's anything specific that you might have taken out of it that's useful for you at this stage. We got any questions before we go in? No? All right. I'll just set it up for 5 minutes. Just keep an eye on that yourselves and just talk about those 4 elements and, how it's landed with you in this very first run through.